Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A 66 still?
Still 66.
Still 66.
Gosh, it seems like we were just here.
All right. We did a long stream today. We're going to try to keep it on track for the questions so we can get to a bunch of them.
Yep. Oh boy,
Oh,
the dog
goodness.
just sneezed on my leg.
That happened.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. Hey Tesla, you know that the cream is actually back there.
Oh no.
Oh boy.
All hell's breaking loose.
We have chaos. Should I help him out or should I just let him figure it out?
We'll figure it out.
Okay. He's going to change the questions. Wow, not his best move. Okay. So we are going to start with 4 questions from last time and then go to the Discord question and then launch into them. Man, you guys asked a ton of good questions this week. I will pick some of them up next week, but we won't get through all of them, as usual. What are your best news sources for science-related reporting? Have you ever considered being a part of starting a news outlet that does science reporting better for the sake of science and the public? Let me take that first. I thought, wow, I have no idea. And then I realized actually that both Nature and Science, the journals, which are, imperfect for sure, but that they have news sections. So, they have their sections where they are publishing the peer-reviewed literature, and these are considered the 2 most esteemed science journals in the world, but they also have news, and every week, you don't have to be a subscriber or have institutional support to get their weekly journals. You can get the table of contents delivered to your inboxes every week, and Science, for instance, has a This Week in Science and Best Picks or something. I don't remember what it's called, but basically they have people there looking through the other literature, basically the papers that they probably got sent and they rejected and then were published somewhere else. And then they're like, hey, that's sort of interesting. Let's report on that here. So I religiously read those every week. And there's other places too, but that's probably the big source for me in terms of where I look, where I find breaking research that is of interest.
It's funny that you say you read them religiously. I'm imagining that Richard Dawkins is shaking his fist at us right now.
Yeah. And then, have you ever considered being a part of starting a news outlet that does science reporting better for the sake of science and the public? Yeah, sure.
We have, and it's not exactly the province of the Consilience Project, but it's close, and we are in discussions with those folks. So, in any case, I would say there's a problem with science news, which in part has to do with the fact that a lot of scientific conclusions aren't true. And so the most important thing is not...
So you're not talking about the separate publication that's called Science News.
No.
You're talking about...
I'm talking about how to read news of the scientific sphere, which is to say with plenty of grains of salt. You
have to... So, I don't assume that any of these little news reports in Science or Nature are accurate. You can't assume that the paper is what it claims to be, but you certainly can't assume that the reporting on what the paper claims is accurate. So one of the benefits, unlike say the New York Times, we talked about this Sidewinder paper that I found that first in the New York Times this week, but it was ridiculous how difficult it was to figure out what paper they were talking about. They said things like the author's name in one place and where she was located in another place and where it was published in another place and approximately when, but didn't give co-authors, didn't give a title, and it was actually incredibly difficult to find. And that's something that the more standard news outlets do a poor job of, whereas the reporting on recently published research in an actual scientific journal will always be at least perfect about that, about showing you where to go to find the actual research.
So I would say I tend to read with a lens of what if that were true? Yeah. Right. And then I sort of follow it through. And sometimes it will lead you, actually, that would make a great deal of sense if that were true. And sometimes it leads you to a great deal of skepticism. And then you only really know what you think about it when you see what the thing is based on and whether it was well done. But anyway, grains of salt.
Yeah. Next question. Every spring, a bird makes a nest under the deck by my apartment door in the exact same spot. Eggs get stolen. So why does the bird keep coming back? And how does it know exactly where it was before? So two actually very different questions, right? How does the bird know exactly where it was before? How do you know where your apartment door is? it's going to be a very similar answer. And yes, we're not birds, and we've got more complexity, and actually bird kind of complexity is convergently evolved to mammal kind of complexity. And obviously humans take that complexity a few steps farther than other mammals, but it shouldn't be surprising to us that especially a social bird can find its way in the world and has a map by which to navigate any more than we're surprised when we're able to do it.
Yep. I'm a little surprised by the report that the animal keeps returning, even though sounds like all of the eggs are stolen.
Yeah, no, that sounds like an accident.
Yeah.
I didn't mean accident. I meant mistake.
It sounds like mistake. A bird dodo.
You know they're extinct, right?
No, dodo birds are extinct. A bird dodo is just a bird who doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, obviously, birds who do that don't leave descendants. So that behavior, to the extent that it is genetically heritable, doesn't persist.
Yeah. I wonder how many instances of that you've seen.
Yeah. And, and it's possible too, unless you are banding the birds or have a really good eye for the inter-individual variation in birds, that it's a different individual of the same species, and that the spot seems, by all the usual rubrics that whatever species it is you don't specify, use to be a really great nesting spot, but it turns out it's really not, because someone, say it's a raccoon, knows that there's often a nest there and will always come and steal the eggs. So it could be that it's not the same bird making the same mistake over and over again, which really wouldn't persist in evolutionary time, but rather there's something else about it's tucked away from the wind, from sight, from whatever, that it looks for a season at least like it'll be a good choice. Turns out not to be. That bird never comes back, but it looks exactly as good to what's called a naive bird, a bird that hasn't experienced the losses as it did to the previous naive birds.
Yep.
Hey, Bret, Heather, just wondering if you guys knew anything about LASIK surgery or any other refractive correction surgery. How safe are they really? I feel like I may have talked about this at one point on some former Q&A.
Yep, I feel like it too.
I don't remember where though. So I will say super briefly, I was actually scheduled to have LASIK. I've got incredibly strong myopia, like -7 diopter for those of you who know those sorts of numbers. And the prospect of actually being corrected so that I could do things like play sport and go into the field and not be totally reliant on my corrective lenses was remarkable. And I ended up with a fungus in my eye that I picked up from a long field season in Madagascar, which caused the surgery to be delayed. I had scheduled it for shortly after I got back from this long field season. And in my frustration, I did a bunch more research about what LASIK actually was. The fact is, I don't know long-term. I suspect that the outcomes aren't quite as clean as people are saying, but I don't know in terms of risks. What I do know is that at least at that point, and this is, 15, 18 years ago at this point, that it turns out that anything to 2040 or 2050 or better, even if it wasn't further correctable with corrective lenses, was considered a success. And if you have ever walked around being able to see things, having to be twice as close as anyone else to be able to see them with clarity, which is what 2040 would be, you know that is not actually perfect vision, and you can't actually navigate a jungle safely that way or play a team sport with fast-moving objects effectively. It would effectively turn you into someone who suddenly had a sensory disability when before you just had a kind of disability that was correctable. So I opted not, because fully corrected from LASIK surgery turns out not to mean what most of us would regard as fully corrected.
Yep.
This is just a, I don't know if you've heard about this. So Dr. Drew Pinsky started something called the Rational Revolution. You did it first, but the more rational people, the better. Maybe a non-traditional collaboration could be in the works. Thank you for all you do. All the best. Do you know anything about this?
Nope.
Okay. So,
Interesting.
so I've actually got that highlighted. We've got a lot of stuff to come back to, so I don't know if we will, but thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so this is from the Discord server this week. I usually have a few colds per year, but I haven't had any since the first lockdown in spring last year. I have been masking and disinfecting when appropriate. Is there any downside to having such a prolonged period of inactivity for the immune system?
Is there any downside? Conceivably, there is some downside, but I don't think it could come anywhere near the upside that there clearly is. So, let's put it this way. We can make an argument that you will carry immunity away from these little interactions that you have, which will make you susceptible to them if you encounter these bugs in the future. So you could kind of make a weak argument for the benefit of, it's like taking pride in collecting immunological information in your system, but you're much better off just never having had these bugs. And if you get them later, then you'll pick up the immunity. So I would say, don't question it. Stay away from these bugs.
The capacity for adaptive immunity doesn't decline, right? The exposure, the fact that you might have a slight head start on something should you be exposed in a larger dose will not exist, but the capacity to develop adaptive immunity does not decline just because your immune system has spent a year not mostly being exposed to things.
It wouldn't be that. It will decline a little bit because you'll be older. But I would just say, the thing that we never talk about is that all of these diseases that have symptoms because they're doing tissue damage. And that tissue damage has a cost that we don't typically measure. And so, you in theory have the capacity to live to 120 years of age. You won't because you will have encountered all sorts of things that damaged you along the way and burned up some of the capacity that you would have needed to be present in order to get to 120. And if we turned the dial in favor of more repair capacity, then you'd probably die much earlier of cancer. So anyway, those two things have been balanced. But the basic point is, look, if you can avoid the damage that comes with being sick, and the downside is that you might get sick with that thing later, there might be a tiny little extra cost to being sick with it later. On the other hand, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, then you weren't sick ahead of time and you got away with it. So anyway, I would say, I think the answer you're looking for is no, it's a slam dunk win, right? Does it mean that if we analyze the downside in isolation that it's zero? It's not zero. It might be something, but it's going to be tiny relative to the upside. Go with it, stay healthy, and to the extent that you can learn the lessons of 2020 and 2021 and figure out how never to get these diseases in future cold seasons, all the better.
Yep. So this is like 5 questions, 3 from one person and then 2 others that are all kind of related. So I'm going to read them all before I respond. The first 2 from other people are, have you read the Time.com article yet?
Yes.
And speaking of media pieces, have you read the Time magazine article about the conspiracy to fortify the election? Their words, not mine. I've heard a fair amount of the thoughts on it, but I'd very much like to hear yours. And then a 3-part, or came in 3 parts. I tried to give my all to Unity 2020, but I knew it was a long shot. Had I known that a collective of this magnitude was working against everything but the proper outcome, I would have applied a different tactic. If Time is saying this, then the Overton window has slid so far that if popular opinion no longer represents the reality that I see day to day, I pray that the left of center sees this and has the courage to say something. Oh, by the way, these donations are my birthday gift to myself this year. Please keep up the good work, Bret and Heather. Keep being a voice of the traditional, (, left. Godspeed. So I have not read this article. These all are referencing something that I have not read, but you have.
Yeah. Well, I will say I read it quickly, and I should probably go back through it. It was simultaneously jaw-dropping and maddening, and in another way, no news. So in a sense, I have the feeling that the important thing about it is what isn't in it, right? In other words, it describes an organized effort to do what they euphemistically call fortify the election, something like that.
Is that their language?
I think so. Anyway, we had a discussion about it, quite a good discussion about it on Clubhouse last night. And I thought that discussion went very well with an earlier discussion with Justin Amash about his experience in Congress, which is always revealing. He knows things about what's wrong with our Congress that most of us, even those of us who pay attention, don't know. And so anyway, this is a larger conversation that has to happen. But the basic point about the Time article was that the Time article admits to a kind of collusion that I think marches right up to the limits of what the law will allow. Maybe in one place it treads a bit That's it.
Zach, you want to show this while Dad's talking?
So it describes this organized effort to make sure that, in light of what they expected to go wrong with Trump not ceding power, blah, 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 that they did all of these things, including changing election laws. Basically, they acknowledge a collusion in order to make sure, as they describe it, that the election turns out properly. But the point is actually what they describe is completely consistent with them going well beyond what the law allows and feeling justified in doing it. And most importantly, demonizing those of us who were skeptical of their motives and willingness to break rules, et cetera, et cetera. So, look, on the one hand, your system is completely corrupt. It just is. And this is not surprising. It's weird that the article exists. And, there's some question as to why the article exists. Does it exist to create smoke so that we don't see something much more frightening that may have happened? We don't know. All we know is that there's this article in which they say, yeah, we engaged in all this collusion to make the right thing happen in the election, right? So anyway, it's hard to know what to think about it. I do think one wants to think about it in the context of, okay, here's what's in the article. What isn't in the article? And what did you do to people who didn't believe that the election was just a straightforward exercise in democracy? And, do you owe them an apology, et cetera? But
well,
no.
They're all domestic terrorists, aren't they?
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not sure what to say about it.
Yeah.
Yes, these people suck and they have corrupted your system and they own both parties, and you should expect them to do anything that they can get away with. And it's long overdue that we hold them to account and rescue our system from their absolutely diabolical sense that they know what's right and wrong and that democracy would be too dangerous to allow, or something like that.
Yep. Two related questions here. Hello, Heather. I think I heard you say maybe back in November that there is a proper way to do astrology, but it isn't done by people who practice astrology. If I heard you correctly, what did you mean by that? And then, secondly, per your hypothesis, more complex astrology charts do in fact take into account the hour, minute, and location of one's birth, not just day and year, as these are needed to calculate the relative positions of the planets in the various quote-unquote houses. So what I said, and what's actually in our book, is that astrology is easy to mock because the way that it's done, by and large, the way that most of us run into it, to the extent that we do, is patent crock of garbage, right? It can't be true. And furthermore, I would say, the idea that the hour and minute of your birth,
right? That's proof that the correction isn't a correction.
It can't make any difference. But what I said, and there's a paper that I can't pull up right now because I don't have it pulled up, but it's referenced in our book, and I can talk about it another time. What I said was, it will probably be true that the combination of when you are born in the year, at sort of a seasonal level, not to the minute level, but at a seasonal level, in combination with where you are born, is likely to have developmental effects, because being born, for instance, in the middle of a Minnesota winter versus in the middle of an Arizona summer, and actually those two might actually be surprisingly similar in terms of, you're locked up in close quarters, you may be more prone to respiratory diseases precisely because you're in small places, in the north because it's too cold, and the south because you're in AC all the time. That combination of where and when may well have effects on disease etiology, and also, if that, why not also on personality? And there is a really big retrospective paper looking at, I think it might have even been like hundreds of thousands, although again, I don't want to say that for sure, of patients, of data at some massive hospital in New York that indeed was able to correlate for that hospital. So it's one spot. So they've kept the location constant, and they've looked at the rate of the risk of disease as these people grew up, all having been born into this hospital. And it is many of these diseases vary significantly by month in which they were born. That there are some months in which you can be born where you were much more likely, at least in this particular paper, some months in which you can be born in New York where you are much more likely as an adult to end up with heart disease versus mood disorders if you're born at some other month. So we know that is true. And that seems to me to be clearly suggestive that if you did astrology right, which, again, the fact that people are looking at hour and minute of birth, I cannot begin to fathom what hypothesis gets you to.
It's not. It's nonsense.
To that makes sense, but there can be some something to the idea that if you know when you were born and where you were born, you might be able to predict something about how you will be.
So, what I want to say is there may be some ancient tradition of astrology that accidentally happens into this area and has nonsense explanations or metaphorical explanations for patterns. That doesn't mean there's some way to do astrology right. The only thing that we are saying is that it would not be surprising if people could be broken into cohorts based on when they were born and where they were born that had predictive consequences. And the way to see this is, let's imagine that we compare not somebody from Minnesota to somebody in Arizona, but somebody in Arizona to somebody in Sydney, right? What is the prediction of the fact that somebody, frankly, I know so little about astrological signs and when they come, I can only use my own, which I happen to know.
Right, me too.
Right. So, Pisces is born in late February, and that Pisces is born in the middle of winter in Arizona and in the middle of summer in Sydney. It may predict exactly the opposite things of what personality would flow from that interaction with the world.
Right.
So the point is, you can't say a Pisces has these characteristics. You might, if you lived in one place and everybody else lived in that place, notice characteristics. You could conceivably come up with a pattern that would be detectable.
And that pattern would break if you moved within the first 3 months of your life.
The pattern would be very noisy for those reasons.
Yep.
And, to the extent that you said, hey, I've noticed this pattern, and you wrote about it and you you mailed it to somebody in some different locality, then the point is, chances are that unless the locality is pretty similar, it will break. And to the extent that you don't notice that everything is inverted as you cross the equator, you screwed up.
Yep. So Zach, you can just show my screen. I did pull up the paper I was talking about. It's from 2015. Boland et al. Birth month affects lifetime disease risk, a phenome-wide method. And they look at 1,749,400 individuals, that is to say records, from New York Presbyterian and Columbia University Medical Center, people born between 1900 and 2000. So pretty amazing data set that they look at. Maybe that's all for that.
Yeah, that's an amazing data set, but you would expect that from Virgos.
Nice.
Thank you.
Very good. Let's see. This one, this person wanted us to answer so badly that they asked it twice in different parts of the super chat. Can you please help me understand why you support the Paris Climate Accord? It seems to be a mostly virtue signaling measure as goals are self-selected and unenforced. Is it symbolic or substantive and able to make a difference?
Yeah.
You're nodding.
Yes. Frankly, as I said, I'm not hopeful that the Paris Accords actually do anything worth doing. What I'm interested in is that all nations participate in a discussion about how to govern the global commons with respect to oceans, atmosphere, etc. So it is just simply the reestablishment that we are part of the community of nations and that we could be brought into an agreement in which we all did our share to rein in runaway processes, of which I do think climate change is one. But no, I have no particular fondness for the Paris Accords, and I remember when they were initially signed, rolling my eyes and thinking, that isn't going to work, not nearly sufficient. So nothing special about those accords, just the participation in the community of nations is really what it is.
Great. Is there an evolutionary explanation for near-death experiences? Love to you both from Canada. Were we just talking about this?
Yeah, we were just talking about this.
talking about this?
Yes, I believe there is a very interesting explanation, and I promise you, somehow in the next year, it's going to fit in with the other things that I am holding back and want to deliver in some form other than deeply buried in a Q&A. But let's just say, you ought to think not only about the experiences of those who get very close to death, but you ought to think also about their loved ones. That's all I'm going to say. But yes, I believe there's a perfectly rigorous evolutionary hypothesis to be tested, and I'm very hopeful that it will turn out to be true. And my guess would be, if it is true, that it will change the way we address end of life. And actually, it materially alters what the right thing to do with a dying person is.
Yeah, that's good. I was talking with a friend the other day about how a male's purpose has changed. He argued because times are more peaceful, many have harder times finding meaning. What is the validity of that statement?
I don't want to compare as between males and females because I think this moment is so distorting of purpose for almost everybody. And yes, there are ways we could focus on a particular problem for males. And I think some of these problems are particular, that there were, honorable ways for many different kinds of men to contribute in the world. And that now that we are suddenly demonizing masculinity itself, that of course anybody whose strengths are in that neighborhood is now suspect, viewed as dangerous. And, let's just be clear about this. It's a dangerous world. Men have done the heavy lifting of protecting their populations and their nations for all of human history. So that was a role somebody could play, and a way that we understood people to be contributing to our collective well-being. And to the extent that this is a world in which that doesn't necessarily add up, yes, it has taken a large category of meaning and essentially almost eliminated it from the map.
Yeah, I concur with that. And I guess I would say we, several months ago now, watched a series of basically war films and war stuff with our boys, starting with the series Band of Brothers, and then we watched 5, 6, 7 really excellent movies, mostly World War II and Vietnam, about World War II and Vietnam. And those in combination with, you haven't, but I have, in fact, I've read one excerpt here, both of Sebastian Junger's books, he has more than this, but War and Tribe speak to what war can do for men with regard to finding meaning and also, community, which is a word that probably very few soldiers use with one another, but that there is certainly there has always been a role for men in peacetime, but wartime has provided other roads to meaning and productivity, really, as well.
Yep.
And this is a question, I guess, for people who were out there, which, because it was in the super chat, some people will have seen. But has anyone started holding live group screenings? I feel like I could be in an outdoor theater of sorts, in fresh air and sun, watching this with others in real time. Loose discussion to follow during intermission. Much love. I love that idea. I think that's great.
Yeah, I do too. live group screenings, like people getting together to watch. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah. Stay safe outdoor. I like outdoor fresh air. Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe a suggestion to take to the Discord, since that's a place where people actually can potentially hook up, get together.
Yeah, and it would be cool actually to interact with such things if there was some level of organization. Yeah, good idea.
And then this one, actually, the top donation this hour, for which we are grateful, which I didn't see at first. Much love to you both from the true north, once strong and still somewhat free. Huge appreciation for showing up the ramparts of nuance against BS. And then a secondary donation, and one for young Zachary, of course. Great work, sir. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
And then this one as well, big donation. I have made an extensive attempt to explore the approach to model building and subsequent behavioral modification you are discussing here, especially with respect to managing the breath. I invite your feedback. Please check Patreon messages. YouTube won't let me link it here. So I will, it's a very large donation. I will link that. It would be useful to know which Patreon. Patreon does not make it easy to search through messages. So if we have to search through everyone's messages, it's hard. Like, I try to go through all of them and I don't get through all of them. And I know you aren't able to.
There's a particular problem where somehow the interface does not allow a response, at least through the phone. So at the point that I get these things, I see them, I write a response, and then it doesn't go through, and it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, the phone app for Patreon is no good.
Yeah,
it's really not. Thanks for clearing up the bear virus origin story. The bears have been doing research in circuses for years without being held accountable.
Interesting point.
Thank you for recognizing what we were actually talking about.
Yes. I do hope there are no more bears in circuses. I like bears.
Yeah.
No way to live.
Yeah. As a bear? In a circus.
I don't think it's
being
right
a bear is no way to live?
No. Being a bear is a great way to live, I'm told. But
while the lab leak hypothesis is gaining steam, still we hear the trope that there's nothing about the virus's structure itself that suggests it's man-made. Would love to hear further thoughts. So this came in pretty early last hour, probably before we got to talking about exactly this.
Yeah, let's just say in short, it depends what you mean by nothing in the virus's structure. There are anomalous things in the genetic information in the genome. They are things that could be explained through natural processes. There are things that could be explained through known laboratory processes. And it is worth saying that the Barrick lab, in fact, created a technique that they, in fact, officially labeled as no-seum cuts or no-seum edits. And so the basic point is, look, the art of altering genomes so as to leave something that is as if natural is part of what is being attempted in the lab. So, I would say either you're going to read into the sequence and then there is evidence and it is not conclusive, or you're not going to read into the sequence and you're going to look for some sort of gross structural change which you are unlikely to see. I think that's here you go. No seum sites.
Yep. So this I think was a preprint. I have not gotten through all of this. I'll scroll up and give you guys all vertigo, but it's a site I happen to have open. Synthetic Viral Genomics, Risks and Benefits for Science and Society, written by Ralph Barrick at UNC Chapel Hill, 2006. And it's long, but there's a lot of what appear to be smoking guns in here.
Or at least gun smoke.
Yeah, maybe just gun smoke. Okay. There seems to be a penalty to stating the obvious regarding lab escape. Is this tabooization of basic reason a more recent feature of a modern culture, or is there an evolutionary component?
There's an evolutionary component, but it's out of place. So, in short, I would say, in most circumstances, you want to be pretty much in sync with what your population believes. that there's very little to be gained by being out of step with your population, and you're very unlikely to change what your population believes. And so more or less accepting the mythology of your population is a good idea. Scientists have to do the opposite, right? The whole point of science is to discover what we don't know about the way things actually function, which means you have to be a little bit deaf, or maybe even a lot deaf, to what people think they know so that you can see past it. And what's happened is very normal human processes have been allowed to contaminate science, and we no longer reward people. In fact, we punish them for being out of step with the conventional wisdom, which basically causes science to be much more like a rubber stamp of conventional wisdom. So, something like that.
Yep. 2 podcasts ago, you mentioned that in some animals that operate in 3 dimensions, like birds of prey, females tend to be larger than males. Could you elaborate on the connection between the 2?
Yeah, the connection is, so imagine the following. Selection builds a creature to be ecologically optimal. And then it distorts that creature for reasons that matter a lot with respect to fitness, whatever fitness exactly is. And it's not exactly reproduction, but close enough. In order to get to reproduction, you can be distorted from your ecological optimum. Now, in cases where males and females are monogamous, the interests of males and females tend to be quite symmetrical, and the force that distorts one or the other tends to be small. In general, it's going to be males who are distorted. In cases where there is not monogamy, and there's therefore a large prize in terms of many mates to be gained by winning these competitions, the distortions can be very, very large. So the iconic example would be elephant seals, where males can be many times, I think it's 6, I've heard up to 11, but let's say 6 times the size of females.
I think certainly the word distortion is apropos in the case of elephant seals.
Oh, so distorted.
Yeah.
But in any case, the point is the ecological optimum looks a lot like a female, because a female goes out into the world and does her ecological thing, and the distortions necessary for her to reproduce are small. Right? So she looks pretty close to the ecological optimum. The male is wildly off that optimum in elephant seals. In fact, in elephant seals, he has a whole different ecology, because you can't feed a large body like that in the same niche that the female is feeding a small body like that. So males go much farther, they dive much deeper. Anyway, it's a weird system. But the key thing is, if you're going to compete in 2 dimensions, like an elephant seal who competes with other elephant seals on a beach, on a rookery.
Yeah, so just to be clear, like they forage in 3 dimensions, but they compete socially in 2 dimensions.
Yeah,
they're pretty much solitary in 3 dimensions.
Males who are competing for harems bash each other and gouge each other on beaches. It's a 2-dimensional.
Distorted, like I said.
Yeah, distorted. But imagine that instead of being in that 2-dimensional plane, you were going to engage in some sort of aerobatic battle, or, a 3-dimensional aquatic battle. Then the answer is, well, being bigger and burlier might not pay, and being smaller and more agile might pay. And so the competition pushes in exactly the opposite direction. It pushes in the direction of, of agility.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much to say there, but let's move through. As someone with their bachelor's in dietetics and PhD in nutritional biochemistry and I don't know if that stands for physiology or physics. Nutritional biochemistry and physics or physiology, I'm not sure which. I'm going to start over and just make up a word. As someone with their bachelor's in dietetics and PhD in nutritional biochemistry and
physiology, it's got to be.
I think so, probably. I vouch for your current positions on nutrition and disease. I also agree that more evolutionary training in nutrition is needed. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yes. Can you give us the recipe for the cocktail, the Portland mugshot?
I mean, we covered this.
I know.
Right.
I think our awesome clips guy, Dave, even clipped it.
All right, but yeah. I'll give you a little review.
Yeah.
Right, if you need
Do we have time, though?
If you need more detail, you can go back to the clip. But basically, you want to do this with as much care as you can.
No, we don't have a mug.
You place the mug on a flat surface.
Does it have to be flat?
Yes. It has to be a level surface. Flat, not so much, depending on the bottom of your cup. But you put the cup on a level surface, 1 ounce of your hard alcohol of choice, put it in the bottom, and then that's it. Then you drink it.
Yep. It's fancy.
Yes, it is.
Men do like their fancy drinks.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, you can put
There's no umbrella?
No, there's no. It's a raincoat.
A little fake Hawaiian grass or something?
Something.
Okay. You hear about the river that flooded the Garden of Eden? Yeah, God damned it. Have you seen the U-Haul documentary yet? It's moving. These are original dad jokes from Cecil Charles official.
I appreciate, the thing is, it takes
I should have had you read them, but
yes,
you weren't prepped.
It takes a certain amount of courage to write down a dad joke because, if you deliver a dad joke and it doesn't go over, it dissipates. If you don't remind people, then it doesn't come up in their memory and it's lost.
But yeah, watch. I'm highlighting this. There's no way we're losing these. We got them.
There we go. Yeah. You got it. You're not living this down.
Yeah. Telling evolutionary biologists to stay in their lane. You should send them a photo of the 8-lane 405 freeway in LA. Those are all our lanes. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Man. That's right.
Yes. I frequently say evolutionary biology is licensed to transgress all disciplinary boundaries.
Much to the irritation of almost everyone else.
Pretty much everybody, which is delightful in its own right.
Yes, you do find it so.
Yeah.
Let us, what's the time, Zach?
You are at 40 minutes.
40 minutes. Let us switch and see how many questions we've got in the super chat at this point for this hour, and then maybe we'll come back. We're missing a lot of them, but.
Another question there, except out of line.
So. Okay. Another one at a higher. I work in the middle of Western Australia as a lifeguard, forced to stay in the sun for long periods of time. Should I not then artificially adapt myself to be more like the locals, that is, wear sunscreen?
Right. Should I not then artificially...
Should I not wear sunscreen?
Oh, well, I would say this is actually pretty simple. Unfortunately...
It's tougher for a lifeguard, though, without...
It's not totally without risk. Here's what I would say the answer is. If you can behaviorally prevent yourself from getting sunburn, then I would say don't wear sunscreen. The last thing you want is sunburn. Sunburn is really, really dangerous, right? Now, it's more dangerous the younger you are. That we know. Sunburns when you're young give you cancer when you're old. The older you are when you get the sunburn, the less it matters. For a couple different reasons. And
you have a little bit of that still in the telomere paper, right? You left a little bit of that stuff in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I would say if you can behaviorally adjust so that you don't need the sunscreen in order to avoid the sunburn, that's better. But if you're going to get a sunburn for trying to use behavior, the sunscreen is probably better.
Absolutely. And by behaviorally adjust, you mentioned this, but it was so fast in passing in the first 2 hours today. You started proposing and you had our children do, and our children have had almost no sunscreen on their bodies. And Zach got a sunburn once on a field trip, as I remember, a really bad one. But I think Toby's never had one, and they've spent a lot of time outside in the sun. Anyway.
No way true, but the second part, we both had a few sunburns, not that many. But.
Okay, Zach says there's been some sunburns. I'm going to guess though that many of those have been at camp when we weren't overseeing it.
Yeah.
So the behavioral modification that you started to have all of us do was, pick your periodicity. It's going to be different depending on what your skin type is. Like you're way more prone to burning than I am, for instance. But say it's after 15 minutes in the sun with no protection, between the hours of 10 and 2 at a place close enough to the equator to really feel that. You begin to feel anyway warm. You find shade. And you stay in the shade for, a third the amount of time or something that you've been out there for. Or, maybe maybe the refractory period is actually the same period no matter how long you've spent out. But you have to...
I find it's in order to be effective at this, it's actually relatively short breaks can give you relatively long periods in the sun.
Yeah.
But you can't skip one.
You can't skip one. So maybe it's 20 or 30 minutes that you can go, depending on how early it is in the season, what your ancestors were and, how light your skin is, all of this. How early in the season, meaning both do you have any protection laid in this season yet at all? And also how strong are the sun's rays, depending on how close to the solstice it is. But just so rinse and repeat, right? Like 25, 30 minutes out in the sun, make sure you have a place to retreat to. If as a lifeguard, you have one of those huts, I'm most familiar with the ones from the SoCal beaches. If you have one of those places that you can actually be sitting in fully not in the sun when you're not actually doing a rescue, then you probably don't need sunscreen.
Yeah. I would also say, in my experience at least, at the point where you feel like, oh no, did I burn? Right? Your skin is a little bit hot and you feel like you may have,
Get out.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it still works. The
Yeah.
point is it's actually substantially beyond that the real burn starts. There is a warning if you pay attention to it.
Yeah. All right, we were going to switch. There's Zach's got a line for us. White House press secretary said, even after vaccines, we will have to mask and social distance. Isn't the point of a vaccine that it changes things for the better? That's our friend Holly asking the right questions, as she always does.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say I'm a little bit cautious about this because I still don't think we know where we are with respect to COVID. And yes, ideally, the whole point of the vaccines is to get us out of this mess. On the other hand, we know very little about, what happens downstream of these vaccines. We're going to start pushing this virus around evolutionarily by denying it access to people who've all had the same vaccine, which is going to cause it to change. And so, it's not binary, right?
Yeah.
The immunity is valuable. I'm not saying that we won't have our trust abused and be told to modify our behavior even when it's not epidemiologically necessary. I think that's a risk. But it's not clear to me that given how precarious things are, that, for one thing, we haven't even done the basics here.
We don't know yet if the vaccines actually block transmission. They seem to reduce symptoms in the people who've had the vaccines and hopefully also the likelihood of them getting it. But if they have it, we don't have any evidence that it blocks transmission. I think it would be super surprising if it didn't.
Yeah.
Like really, really surprising. But I think there's still no clinical evidence for that.
But we also, we haven't even talked about whether or not it makes sense for people who've had COVID to have the vaccine, which,
but this is another thing that's just being said. Well, of course you need to get the vaccine.
Right. And I can think of mechanisms that would actually make it counterindicated. And certainly there is the unhedged risk, and there is every possibility that having had COVID actually gives you the protection the vaccine would give you anyway. So it's really unclear to me, especially in light of the fact that we apparently have a problem with the amount of vaccine. Right. There's all sorts of arguments why we might want to at least think twice with respect to people who've already been sick.
Yeah. No, I'll just, I'll say again that the three groups that are easy for me to say really be cautious, like really consider not, is children, no. Pregnant women, no. And if you've already had COVID, consider the risks with that information as part of your risk assessment.
Yes. With, the wild card of you're triggering the immune system with a protein your immune system is already primed to react to. Mm-hmm. So, just to be clear about this, I'm not saying the following thing does happen, but I'm saying the following thing is plausible and therefore deserves to be eliminated as a possibility rather than just assumed not to be a possibility. If you get a vaccine and it causes the production of spike protein in order to inform your immune system, but your immune system is already primed to react to that spike protein, the spike proteins that you produce in order to create that reaction may gum up the cells of your immune system, which are primed to react to it, and it could make you more prone to COVID. Mm-hmm. Am I saying it happens? No.
Or is it possible that it could promote an autoimmune response itself?
Which is always the danger here. You're talking about a system.
Either of those, which are different possible outcomes, neither of which is good.
Yeah. So, in any case, I don't know how we ended up in this ridiculous predicament, but here we are.
Yeah. FYI, Tim Pool invited you guys live on air to come to his show this last week. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Second, if you go dark, do you have alternate sites and contact lists? Great work. Cool. Well, thanks for telling us about Tim Pool. Did not know that, and you're the first person to tell us. Yeah, we really should get more of our ducks in the row about, for instance, at least being on, I don't even, is it pronounced library? LBRY, potentially. We do have, both of us have websites that have email sign up sheets, mailing lists. And I bet if I say that badly, the person who monitors them will text me here, and I'm just going to turn it off airplane mode so that if I get that wrong, they can correct me and I can see what the actual correct thing is. I'm going to put my phone here. So if you go to either of our websites and just sign up, I think it may say, sign up to here when the book is available for pre-order. Well, our book is available for pre-order now, but there's still potentially reason to get your name into our system. We have yet to use those lists in any way, and we promise no spam. So that's as good as we have at the moment, but we should do better.
We should be more diligent about this.
Yeah, let me just see if. Yeah, I know.
So far,
I said it right.
We are depending on the fact that we make very poor villains, and that makes us a little bit hard to throw off these platforms.
Yeah. It turns out we don't suck behind the scenes. Sorry, enemies, making their jobs hard.
Yeah, that's what we do.
If we, I should color that. Zach, could you make that Tim Pool one a different color, since I have a harder time when it's in this framework? The one that I've got highlighted at the moment. Yeah. If we are programmed to minimize senescence, can we hack it positively by having a sense of purpose, whose primary form may be parental care, tending to our genes? Is art the extended phenotype of parental care?
A little hard to parse the question, but I think
this is Echo, and I feel like it might be two questions.
I think the question is about just substituting one kind of productivity for the standard biological. And I think this is absolutely true. And I think actually selection has done it at the lineage level, that it rewires individuals to do exactly this. And it does so because lineages in which individuals are rewired that way have advantages over lineages in which everybody is wired for their own fitness. So yes, now, art is a little bit hard to know. Yeah, yes. Things within the realm of art can be exactly this if you imagine selection at a lineage level. And certainly at this stage in evolution, whether or not it's a historical pattern, it's something we would be wise to consider doing.
Yeah. This next one, I think there's something interesting here, but I don't think there's enough information for me to know exactly what the question is. When John McWhorter rebuffed that A men and A women meme wagon, it reminded me of a C.S. Lewis quote about a process that, quote, will make us into devils. I would love to hear this described evolutionarily.
Yeah, I
just don't know enough about the Lewis quote to respond.
Yeah, but I mean, we can infer that there is certainly something about mob mentality and witch hunting, etc., which is the result of people feeling morally justified to go after other people. So I don't know what the Lewis quote is. I'm curious, but there are such processes, and we've seen them up close, and it's dangerous stuff.
All right. Any ideas on why testosterone levels are plummeting in men? Thanks. Was it on our private Q&A that the answer to some similar question ended up being plastics?
Plastics is going to be part of it.
I think that was. Yeah.
But there's lots of stuff tangled up here.
That was specifically, I think, about women, female reproductive success and birth control and stuff. But
right.
Yeah.
But I would say, look, every so often you run into a finding that doesn't mean what you think it means, right? Like, cancer rates are going up. Are cancer rates going up because there are more carcinogens? Well, that's one possibility, and almost certainly true. It's also true that people are living longer, right? the longer you live, the more likely you ultimately get cancer.
It's also true that we've got fancier, more finely honed techniques by which to discover cancers, many of which we never would have seen before, and the people living with them wouldn't have actually had their lives cut short by them because they were so small and insignificant.
Exactly. It's also true that to the extent that you cure other things, people don't die of gangrene anymore. If you cure everything but cancer, then we'll all die of it. So, the fact that it would be 100% doesn't mean anything.
Why are cancer rates going up?
Right.
Because we cured gangrene.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the point is you got to start thinking in that way in order to know whether testosterone levels plummeting means something. Now, I think there is a result that suggests that testosterone levels are going down. But
it's actually hard for me to fit this question into the rubric that you just described.
Well, what I was going to point out is one reason testosterone levels will go down is men are living longer and they go down with age. Right?
Oh, so if this is just an aggregate across the lifespan measure.
Right.
Okay. And I actually don't know the data. I've heard this thing as everyone has heard, but I actually have not looked at the data.
Yeah. So there's that.
That's a definite possibility. What if they've done it well, though? What if they've controlled for that and said testosterone for men in their 30s is lower than it was 50 years ago?
And it could be a lot of things. And it's very tempting to think, it's a physiological input. But it's also likely to be true that testosterone levels are responsive to one's own perception of their, place in a hierarchy or the need for the characteristics that are downstream of testosterone.
There it is.
If the culture is emasculating in a metaphorical sense, then it may be that the body responds to this feeling by, moving away from testosterone. Don't know.
Yeah. And then to get back to the plastics question, there's not too many androgens in the water supply, male steroid hormones, but there are lots of estrogens and estrogen mimics. I wonder, and I actually just do not know the biochemistry well enough to know if this is even plausible, but because, which way is it? Does testosterone aromatize into estrogen, or is it the other way around? I don't even remember which direction that goes. But something, big black box here.
You just said it right, but I don't remember.
I said it both ways, though.
The second one, you said testosterone aromatizes
into estrogen.
Right?
I
don't want to say, but
yeah. So giant biochemical black box here, which again, if I had time, I can go look at some of the work I did on this in the early 90s. Excuse me. I wonder if one of the effects of having all of these, basically of having our systems flooded with a bunch of exogenous estrogens, might in part be sending the body a message about not needing to produce as much testosterone as well. And that's really imprecise as a prediction, given that I can't even remember the sort of the fundamental endocrinology at the core of it. But I think there might be something there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where are we? Are Elon's companies game B? That is, in that their main purpose is not to make money yet.
Well, I wouldn't think of it that way. Those of us who take game B seriously talk about things that have elements of game B. So game B would be a system. It is possible for a project to have a component of game B, but not all components. Or it's also possible for it to be a prototype that could mature into something like a game B. And I would say Musk's endeavors certainly have some elements that lean in this direction. They're not alone in that regard, but yes, there's something there. There's some reason to invoke game B with those projects.
Mm-hmm. I'll Fight You Naked says that the Time article proves the election was rigged.
Oh, goodness. Does it prove the election was rigged?
I mean, not to go all Clintonian, but I guess it depends on what your definition of rigged is.
This is why this is driving me crazy.
Yeah.
They're all fucking rigged. They're all rigged.
Right, and this is a point you've made here.
I've made it many times. If they're not rigged in the general election, they're rigged in the primaries. Every single fucking one. They don't want to risk democracy. They fear it, right? So this one was weird, right? And this article is strange. But, to say the election was rigged leaves the implication that the outcome, that the number of votes that Biden won and the implication in the Electoral College was inaccurate enough to change the outcome. We do not know that. What we know is that there was an organized effort to play some game at the same time we were being told there was no game. But how could anybody believe that there was no game? Right? There was a game from the beginning. There was an attempt to remove Trump from office from the moment he took office. It was ongoing, right? There was an impeachment. Did he abuse power enough to be impeached? Yeah, I think so. But they didn't care, clearly.
Yeah.
Right? They wanted to impeach him because it was the thing that it was the red meat that they needed to throw to their constituents, and it was the narrative they needed to feed. So, I'm having this weird experience with this thing, which is like, okay, a lot of people were impressed with this article. Maybe it's super impressive and I'm the only person who doesn't get it. But, yes, the system is rigged. The whole thing is rigged. Was the election rigged?
Well, isn't the impressive, I haven't read it, but isn't the impressive thing about the article that it's published in Time magazine? Just like we started off the first 2 hours today by saying, hey, Matt Ridley and Alina Chen actually got into the Telegraph, and then there's one in the Washington Post, and like this is actually hitting some mainstream places such that more people are going to read it and go, I wonder what that means.
So first of all, those are two opposite things, because this article is triumphalist. The Time magazine article is like, hey, look at all this cool stuff we did to fortify the election, blah, 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 blah. It's proud, right? It's not the high quality.
Okay. So I don't know that.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, it's that, which, yes, it's freaking alarming. But I don't know what to do with the fact that I'm not having the same reaction as other people.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
You often, to things that you experience, don't have the same reaction as other people, and then you think and you think and you think on it, and often that is where the insight happens. So I'm not saying it's going to happen right here. Like that's not how it happens. But you being thrown by not having the same reaction to this article as what appears to be the reaction a lot of other people are having. I would caution you that the tenor of questions doesn't necessarily tell you what people are thinking. And maybe you've had other conversations, maybe you've seen other stuff online, but that is exactly when there's a mismatch between what the world seems to be perceiving and you specifically go in and say, I am not in any way interpreting this the way everyone else seems to be. There's something to be seen here. There's something to be discovered.
Yep, could be. And no doubt in discussing it, hopefully I will advance the ball by pushing other people who are having the other reaction in some ways that they wouldn't be pushed, and vice versa. But I would just say, okay, that article taken in isolation, alarming.
Mm-hmm.
In a week, and I did find during our break, I did find the article. It was a different article in which the New York Times proposed a reality czar. But, it was right there in black and white in the New York Times, Jesus. Right? And they're like, honestly, their point is, we know that sounds bad, but hear us out. And it's like,
I had a conversation with a friend this week, and she said, I just feel every day like asking, are you punking us? Like, seriously, are you punking us right now?
Look, I'm not saying there's any evidence for this, but this kind of derangement of society over issues this simple, right? Is somebody doing this to us? It's a fair question, right? Because it's hard to imagine how you could get this dumb on your own, right? Honestly, a reality czar, that's the thing. We're going to shut down chat because people might say things that aren't true. Those two things in the same week, the same week in which we're talking about the idea that merit is racist and therefore we should find some other thing to,
And for the first time in a year, the people who are supposed to be leading the charge in the biggest pandemic in living history are saying, Well, maybe that thing that we were mocking all year is possible. Sure.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe.
The whole thing is so off the rails that, it is some kind of a collective psychotic break that we haven't figured out how to grapple with. But as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing, this is reason decohering, and it does not surprise me in the slightest that that, as I said before, everything up to the limit of the law was done, and probably beyond. And what isn't in that article? That's what I want to know.
I guess I have to read it. Where are we at, Zach?
You are at an hour and 5 minutes.
An hour and 5 minutes. Let us do 3 more questions.
Okay.
Shall we? Immunologically, how do bats differ from humans? I don't know the answer to that.
I think the answer to that, I'm sure there are little differences. I don't know what they are, but they're going to be. I don't think there's any difference that there is likely to be that would be meaningful if I said it out loud, right? In other words, you're going to have B and T cell immunity. You're going to have, mammals isn't that old a group, and you're going to have, and we're even higher up the tree here because we're talking about placental mammals. So the immune systems are going to be very, very similar.
Yeah. Regarding interspecies altruism, do mammals exhibit this behavior, interspecies altruism, to protect mammalian genes going forward? I'm thinking about cetaceans protecting humans from sharks, humans keeping dogs and cats, domesticated mammals rearing others, individuals of other species. You go, man.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, cetaceans protecting humans from sharks is not the cetaceans doing humans a favor. It's them spiting the goddamn sharks, which, no, let's put it this way. I actually think something like this is possible. It flies in the face of standard classic evolutionary theory.
Yep.
But let's just say, I think you can the problem is, the way you want to explain this is group selection, and it does not fly that way.
The way the person asking the question wants to explain it?
No, the way one wants to.
It
the
just
quick
feels
and dirty way
natural
to
to
get
get there. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
It's very kumbaya. On the other hand,
group selection, : it's very kumbaya.
it's very kumbaya. Hi, David. Sloan Wilson.
Oh, man.
But let's put it this way. The nice thing, one of the many nice things about the, I believe, completely rigorous lineage way of viewing these processes is that it allows you to see responsibly how such a thing could work for larger scale clades, right? In other words, a clade that got through history by virtue of some kind of interspecies collaborativeness is still getting through history, which is the whole point. So anyway, I don't know how often it happens, but let's just say our whole categorization is broken, right? And there are ways for something to look like what you've hypothesized that isn't that. That's basically just reciprocal altruism. Or which would be called mutualism when it's between members of a different species, but really we're talking about the same process. But yes, there is a way for it to happen. How often it happens, I don't think we know.
Final question. What are the likely risk factors and causes of autism? It's a big question. I haven't thought carefully enough about it. I think we could do an interesting analysis with some time to consider. But on first pass, I will say there's probably some mechanisms by which it develops that are biochemical and or genetic.
Yep.
But by and large, given the rate of increase that we see in modernity, it's going to be yet another. Again, the focus of our book, yet another hyper-novel set of situations. And one thing that we have talked about in the past is that strikes us as likely to be a risk factor is parking your children in front of screens, especially And, it's unlikely that these screens wouldn't have these things, but especially screens with human or humanoid or animal-like critters that appear to be interacting, but that when the young child tries to interact with the screen, of course, the screen does not interact back. And that this will, it seems kind of obvious, developmentally send a message that those things that appear humanoid aren't necessarily so, and that they keep doing whatever they're doing, even absent attempts at interaction.
Well, it breaks, so there's a developmental feedback that will set in between actual humans, right? Where you emote. You don't necessarily know that that's what you're doing, but you emote and the person reacts, and you develop the capacity to send messages in this way.
Yeah.
And to the extent that the thing on the screen looks just like a person and you emote at it and it's completely indifferent, it breaks the normal developmental thing.
Yeah, that's better said. That's good.
I will say there was some interesting evidence pointing in this direction years ago. It was very odd, but there was a flurry of interest surrounding a paper that indicated that autism was more common in rainy climates. And the hypothesis, which I don't know if it was tested going forward, but the hypothesis, which was all too plausible, was that the rainy climates were causing more indoor time, more screen time for the kids, therefore triggering, I don't think they got to the analysis that we just delivered, but the idea being that it would bring about something like that disruption of the developmental environment. So I guess the last thing I would want to say is, and you suggested this, but autism is liable to be a garbagey category. That the point is it's downstream of very complex processes. And how many different disruptions are there that could lead you to have things that we say, oh, that's autism, right? So we need to be careful because it can be, can be a chemical, and at the same time it can be a developmental influence. And frankly, the overarching, as you point out, the overarching concern is evolutionary novelty. Just your child is encountering a great many things an ancestor would not have encountered, and some of them have the capacity, to disrupt a normal pathway. And it could be that the very same influence, if it had been encountered, a month later, would have had no important impact. But, the opportunity for the disruption was there. The disruption happened at the right moment, and next thing, some cascade of effects follows from it.
Yep. Well, I think we've reached the end.
The very end?
The very, very end, other than a few announcements here, which are, I hope to have my entire voice back by next week.
Awesome.
Join us at our Patreons, Bret Weinstein or Heather Hyings Patreons, for a whole bunch of interesting stuff. Discord server on both, private monthly Q&A on mine, a couple of conversations on Bret's. The private monthly Q&A is with both of us. There is stuff available at the store, which you see on your screen now, store.darkhorsepodcast.org. You can send questions to darkhorse.moderator@gmail.com. You can find clips on the Clips channel, and if there's anything in particular you'd like clipped, you can send that also to darkhorse.moderator@gmail.com. Anything else?
Achieve greatness. That's what I would
greatness.
suggest. Yes.
Eat good food. Go outside. Love those who should be loved.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Love only those who should be loved, and everybody else too. I guess that's the more.
You ruined it.
I did ruin it. Sorry. All right. Next week, I promise to stop ruining things. All right. Be well, everybody.